These images are impressive. Planes and helicopters flying extremely low, just 3 meters above the ground in Ukraine, almost colliding with cars, trees, power poles, and other obstacles. You should know that this is one of the best and oldest methods to avoid being hit by a missile. If you fly higher, a Russian missile will shoot you down. This technique is well known and has been used for a long time in several conflicts such as the Gulf War. But why does flying low mean not being hit by a missile? To understand why flying low basically means staying alive, you need to understand how radars work. A radar constantly emits electromagnetic waves that travel through the air. If there is any object, like an airplane, in the path of these waves, they will come into contact with its surface and be reflected back to the radar. And it is based on this return that the radar knows there is an airplane there. But if the airplane is flying very low, low enough that it becomes covered by trees, buildings, and other infrastructure, a level where radars usually don't look. Because of the existence of such obstacles, these emitted waves will be blocked. And that's how the airplane manages to camouflage itself and fly relatively safely. Safe in quotes, because flying extremely low greatly increases the risk of colliding with a building, house, or power line. This also raises the risk of the airplane coming down in a populated area in a collision. This type of flight also requires tremendous physical and especially psychological effort from the pilot, who must be very alert to possible obstacles, especially power lines, which are only visible after colliding with them. The Soviet physicist Pyotr Ufimtsev managed, through various mathematical demonstrations, to prove that it is possible to make an airplane practically invisible to radar by changing the configuration of the angles and the shape of the leading and trailing edges of the aircraft. This culminated in the super-secret Lockheed F-117 Nighthawk, the first airplane truly invisible to radar. And that gave rise to several others, such as the B-2 Spirit, the most expensive airplane in the world, and the F-22 Raptor. These planes are costly and designed for specific missions. But flying low doesn't exactly mean you won't get hit. Heat-seeking missiles, for example, launched from other planes, drones, or enemy helicopters, are a very serious threat. There's also the risk of the plane flying extremely low and passing right over an anti-aircraft battery and getting shot down. So, how do you intercept a Russian missile in mid-flight, which is the real threat? On October 12, 2022, the Ukrainian intelligence service released a chart showing the estimated remaining stockpile of Russian high-precision missiles, ignoring for a brief moment the last two, which are cruise missiles, the first one shown in the chart, and also a missile that theoretically has the lowest remaining stock in the Russian arsenal. It's the most feared, most precise, and one of the most destructive and hardest to intercept missiles in the Russian arsenal. These are the Skander missiles, a short-range missile launched from the ground, which flies at a speed of Mach 6 or about 7,350 km/h. It has a range of 500 kilometers, flying about 50 meters above the ground. When launched from Russian territory, it can accurately hit a door in Ukraine. And because it flies extremely fast, it is virtually impossible to intercept or shoot it down in mid-flight with any defense system currently in Ukraine. Its destructive power, depending on the explosive payload inside, is capable of causing serious damage and even collapsing a building with the impact of just one missile. That's why it's among the most expensive and feared missiles. The other two are cruise missiles, notably the Kalibr, the Russian equivalent of the American Tomahawk, a missile that is launched from the sea by defense vessels and can fly for 2,500 kilometers, carrying 500 kg of explosives or a thermonuclear warhead. And the KH-101 and KH-555, which are missiles launched from the air by planes like the Tu-160 Blackjack and the Tu-95 Bear, with ranges of 3,000 kilometers and flights at very low altitude at subsonic speeds of Mach 0.78. And because they fly slower, they are easier to intercept. And why him? Ukraine's current defense system is essentially made up of S-300 surface-to-air missile launch systems built by the former Soviet Union. With ranges of up to 400 kilometers, which find their targets through active radar and use a proximity detonation mechanism, each missile costs more than $1.2 million. In other words, anything that flies over Ukrainian skies and poses a potential risk is shot down by one of these missiles, each costing more than $1.2 million. But Russia has added another item to the equation: kamikaze drones. Known by their technical name, Shahed 136, these Iranian-made drones were acquired by Russia by the hundreds. The Shahed 136 is a low-cost drone costing between $10,000 and $20,000, guided by GLONASS, the Russian equivalent of GPS. It weighs 220 kilograms, has a range of over 2,500 kilometer flies at a low speed of 185 km/h, and carries an explosive payload of 50 kilojoules. With only 3.5 meters in length, it causes significant damage when it hits its target. For example, on October 10th, an attack by a group of several Shahed 136 drones and some missiles destroyed about 40% of Ukraine's power grid infrastructure. An attack using 83 missiles and 17 drones. One of the key features of the Shahed 136 is the way they are launched, from a specially modified container on the back of a truck. In addition, the Shahed is powered by a motorcycle engine, the moped. This engine, the Mato 550, with just a few small modifications made by the Chinese, is a two-stroke engine, very economical, and that's why it allows the Shahed 136 to fly for about 2,500 kilometers. The problem for the Ukrainians is that these drones, which cost $10,000, a very low price for military equipment, are being shot down using missiles that cost over $1.2 million each, and Russia has dozens of them in stock. Even when using the Javelin, which is designed to destroy armored vehicles, each Javelin missile still costs $78,000. And one of the main features of these drones is that several of them are sent at once toward the same target or towards several different targets, which makes it extremely costly and difficult to shoot them down using Ukraine's current defense system, even with international aid and new supplies. So how can these drones be shot down effectively and cheaply? The answer is bullets. Specifically, bullets fired from the cramp or counter-rocket artillery and mortar, which is an automatic firing system used to detect and destroy. While still in the air, rockets, planes, helicopters, drones, and anything else that approaches before hitting targets on the ground. The system uses 20mm bullets and can fire 4,500 rounds per minute. Everything would be perfect, except for one detail. The cramp has a range of only 1.5 kilometers, which means it can only shoot down the drone or missile when it's within a 1.5 kilometer radius of it. Besides having a hit rate of 60%, the accuracy gets even worse the higher the target is, mainly because of the wind, which interferes with the bullet's trajectory. Furthermore, to increase its effectiveness, it means having multiple systems spread out mainly over potential valuable targets in Ukraine, such as government institutions, nuclear plants, substations, weapons warehouses, among others. And it costs somewhere between $10 to $15 million per unit. Basically, for the price of one, you could buy 1,500 Shahed 136 drones. In other words, currently there isn't a proper way. Airplanes. An automatic ramp shot is used to destroy more. The cramp is for detecting even more airplanes. Automatic to destroy them costs $1.2 million in addition to regular weapons. And as for the missiles, which are the real threat, S-300 missiles and some others are also used to shoot them down. And speaking of missiles, on November 18th, the Ukrainian intelligence service updated with a new infographic about the estimated current stock of missiles in the Russian arsenal, highlighting the Skander, for which theoretically there are only 119 missiles left in the Russian arsenal. This is in addition to there being about 6,980 S-300 missiles, the same ones that both Ukraine and Russia use in their defense systems, but which can also be used for attacks against any ground targets. And still speaking of missiles, since the beginning of the invasion, several analysts have pointed out that Russia has been experiencing high and significant failure rates in its missiles. The failures were classified as launch failures, engine ignition failures, failures to hit the target, and even failures to detonate. This may be due to the fact that Russia is carrying out attacks at such a fast pace that they end up using missiles that haven't gone through proper inspections. It could also be because Russia is using very old missiles, which has already been proven, and it could also be due to the fact that Russia is having trouble finding spare parts for its missiles because of sanctions. But one thing is certain, the missiles have been failing at a significant rate,